The auctioneer's gavel cracked against wood like a gunshot, and Naomi Kingston's life became property of a silver mining operation 200 miles north of Sierra Vista, Arizona. All because her mother needed whiskey money more than she needed a daughter. It was August 1873, and the desert heat made the air shimmer like broken glass above the dusty street where Naomi stood with her hands bound, 20 years old, and watching her mother walk away with a pouch of coins that clinked with each unsteady step. The woman who had birthed her did not look back, not even once, and that absence of goodbye hurt worse than any rope burn. Naomi had known for years that her mother valued liquor over love, but knowing something in your mind and feeling it carved into your heart were entirely different experiences. The men who had purchased her contract laughed among themselves, their breath reeking of tobacco and cruelty, and Naomi made herself a promise in that moment. She would survive this, and she would build a life so strong that no one could ever sell it away again. The journey north took 5 brutal days through terrain that shifted from saguaro-studded desert to rocky mountain passes where the air grew thin and cold at night. Naomi rode in the back of a wagon with 3 other women whose eyes held the same hollow desperation she felt clawing at her own chest. They were contract laborers, indentured servants in everything but name, bound to work in the mining camp until their debts were paid. Except the debts never got paid, not really. The company store charged triple for beans and bread, quadruple for medicine, and the wages they promised evaporated like morning dew under accounting that no worker was allowed to question. Naomi listened to the other women whisper their stories during those long nights when the desert cold seeped through their thin blankets. One had been sold by her husband. Another had signed the contract herself, desperate and starving, not understanding the words that bound her. The third woman did not speak at all, just stared at the stars with empty eyes that had seen too much already. The mining camp sprawled across a mountain valley like a wound in the earth, all mud and canvas and the constant thunder of machinery that never stopped, not even on Sundays. They put Naomi to work in the company kitchen, which was better than the laundry or the cribs where some women ended up. But the hours were endless, and the heat from the cook fires made the summer air feel like breathing through wet wool. She woke before dawn to start the fires and prepare breakfast for 200 men, worked through the blazing afternoon preparing dinner, and collapsed after dark only to rise and do it all again. Her hands blistered and bled. Her back ached from hauling water and wood. But Naomi kept that promise she had made to herself burning bright in her chest, a coal of determination that no amount of exhaustion could extinguish. She began to notice things. The camp had no law except what the mining company enforced, which meant the foremen did whatever they pleased and the workers had no recourse. But there were patterns to the chaos. The paymaster kept his records in an office that locked with a key he wore on a chain. The supply wagons came every 2 weeks from Sierra Vista, always on Thursdays, always with the same driver. The company store manager was a drunk who could not keep his numbers straight. Naomi watched and listened and learned, storing information away like a prospector hoarding nuggets. She taught herself to read by studying the labels on food tins and supply crates, sounding out words in the quiet moments before dawn. She learned arithmetic by helping the head cook track inventory, proving herself useful enough that he started trusting her with more responsibilities. 6 months into her contract, a new foreman arrived at the camp, and everything got worse. His name was Samuel Greer, and he was the kind of man who found pleasure in breaking things that could not fight back. He made the women's lives miserable with petty cruelties and threats, pushing boundaries to see who would break first. Naomi kept her head down and her mouth shut, but she saw him watching her with eyes like a snake eyeing a mouse, and she knew it was only a matter of time before he pushed too far. The moment came on a February evening when the desert cold made the air sharp as broken glass. Greer cornered her in the supply shed and put his hands where they had no right to be, and Naomi did not hesitate. She grabbed a cast iron skillet and broke his nose with one swing that carried all her rage and fear and determination to never be anyone's victim again. The sound brought other workers running, and in the chaos that followed, Naomi did the only thing she could do. She ran. She grabbed a canvas coat, a canteen, and a handful of food supplies, and she disappeared into the desert night while the camp was still in uproar. She had no horse, no weapon, no real plan beyond getting as far away as possible before Greer recovered enough to send men after her. The desert at night was a different world, cold and vast and full of sounds that her city-raised instincts could not identify. She walked north by the stars, knowing that going back to Sierra Vista would be the first place they would look. Her feet blistered in boots that were falling apart. Her lungs burned from the cold air and the altitude. But she kept walking, because stopping meant capture, and capture meant things worse than death. Dawn found her collapsed beside a dry creek bed, shivering and exhausted, wondering if running had been bravery or just a different kind of dying. She forced herself to drink water from the canteen and eat some of the hardtack she had grabbed, making herself take stock of her situation with the same practical determination that had kept her alive this long. She had maybe 2 days of food if she rationed carefully. She had no idea where she was except somewhere north of the mining camp in mountains that all looked the same. She needed shelter, water, and a plan that went beyond just running until she dropped. The sound of hoofbeats brought her head up fast, and Naomi pressed herself flat against the creek bank, praying the early morning shadows would hide her. But the rider had already seen her, and he was turning his horse toward her position with the easy confidence of someone who knew these mountains like his own hands. Naomi grabbed a rock, prepared to fight if she had to, but when the rider came close enough to see clearly, her desperation eased just slightly into confusion. He was young, maybe 25 at most, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of whiskey in sunlight. He wore practical range clothes and a gun belt that looked well used, and he studied her with an expression that held more curiosity than threat. "You are a long way from anywhere," he said, his voice carrying the slow drawl of someone who did not waste words. "And you look like you are running from something that scares you more than a stranger with a gun." Naomi kept the rock in her hand but pushed herself to sitting. "Maybe I am just out for a morning walk." His mouth quirked in something that was not quite amusement. "A morning walk with no hat, no horse, and boots that are held together with hope and string." "Sure." He studied her for another moment, then seemed to come to some decision. "My name is Yates Younger. I run a ranch about 10 miles northwest of here. You are welcome to come get a hot meal and some rest before you continue your morning walk." "Why would you help me?" Naomi asked, because in her experience, men did not offer help without expecting something in return. "Because you look like you need it," Yates said simply. "And because I do not much care for men who make women run into the desert alone." He swung down from his horse and held out a hand. "I am not going to hurt you, but I am also not going to leave you out here to die of exposure or thirst. So you can either accept help, or you can explain to me why you would rather freeze to death than trust a stranger who is offering you basic human decency." There was something in his voice, a quiet sincerity that made Naomi want to believe him despite every instinct that screamed not to trust anyone. She was exhausted and cold and so tired of being afraid, and maybe that was why she took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. He boosted her up behind his saddle without making it awkward or threatening, and Naomi held on to his coat as he turned the horse northwest through terrain that slowly shifted from rocky desert to high grassland dotted with juniper trees. The ranch appeared as the sun climbed higher, a collection of weathered buildings clustered around a small creek that caught the morning light like liquid silver. It was not large or fancy, but everything looked solid and well-maintained, the kind of place built by someone who planned to stay. Yates helped her down from the horse and led her to the main house, where an older woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes immediately started fussing over Naomi like she was a lost chick that needed gathering under protective wings. "This is Mrs. Morrison," Yates said. "She keeps the house running and makes sure I do not live on coffee and jerky alone. Mrs. Morrison, this is." He paused, realizing he did not actually know her name. "Naomi Kingston," she said quietly, and saying her own name felt like reclaiming something small but important. "Mrs." Morrison took in Naomi's condition with one sweeping glance, and immediately started issuing orders that had the force of long practice behind them. Within minutes, Naomi found herself in a washroom with hot water and clean clothes, scrubbing away days of grime and fear while trying not to cry at the simple luxury of soap and privacy. When she emerged, dressed in a borrowed dress that actually fit, Mrs. Morrison had breakfast waiting. Eggs and bacon and biscuits with butter that tasted like heaven after months of mining camp slop. Yates sat across the table from her, nursing a cup of coffee and not asking questions, which Naomi appreciated more than he probably knew. She ate slowly, making herself take small bites even though she wanted to inhale everything on the plate. When she finally pushed back from the table, full for the first time in recent memory, Yates set down his coffee and met her eyes with that same steady, measuring look he had given her in the desert. "You do not have to tell me your story if you do not want to," he said. "But I am guessing you are running from the mining operation about 20 miles south of here. They have a reputation for treating their contract workers worse than animals, and Samuel Greer has a reputation for being the worst kind of man. If I am right, then you need to know that he will send men looking for you, and they will check all the ranches and towns within a day's ride." Naomi felt her chest tighten with fear she had been trying not to acknowledge. "So you are going to send me back?" "No," Yates said firmly. "I am going to offer you a job. I need help here at the ranch. Mrs. Morrison is not getting any younger, and there is more work than two people can handle. I can pay you fair wages, room and board, and if anyone comes looking for runaway contract labor, I will tell them I have not seen anything. But you need to understand that I am taking a risk helping you. The mining company has lawyers and connections, and if they push hard enough, they can make trouble for me. So I need to know that you are serious about staying and working, not just using this place as a way station before you run again." Naomi looked at this stranger who was offering her exactly what she had been dreaming of since the auctioneer's gavel fell, a chance to rebuild her life on her own terms. It seemed too good to be true, which made every instinct scream that there must be a catch. But Yates was still watching her with those steady eyes, waiting for an answer, and Mrs. Morrison was refilling her coffee cup like Naomi was already part of the household. She thought about the promise she had made to herself, about building a life so strong no one could sell it away again, and she realized that building required starting somewhere, even if that somewhere meant trusting people she barely knew. "I want to work," she said. "I want to earn my own way and never owe anyone anything again. If you are serious about the job, then I am serious about taking it." Yates nodded once, decisive. "Then we have an understanding. Welcome to the younger ranch, Naomi Kingston. I hope you are prepared for hard work, because ranching is not easy, especially this time of year when we are gearing up for spring calving. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that was demanding but satisfying in ways that mining camp drudgery had never been. Naomi worked alongside Mrs. Morrison, learning the endless tasks that kept a ranch household running. Cooking, cleaning, mending, preserving food, tending the kitchen garden, caring for the chickens and the milk cow. But she also worked outside when the weather permitted, learning to handle horses, mend fences, and manage the 100 small crises that arose when you made your living from land and animals. It was hard work that left her exhausted every night, but it was her work, done for wages she could save, building skills that no one could take away. Yates was a good employer and a better teacher. He was patient when she did not know things, firm when she needed correction, and generous with praise when she got something right. He treated her with the same respect he showed Mrs. Morrison, never making her feel like property or something less than human. Naomi found herself watching him when he did not notice, observing the way he moved with confident grace, the way he spoke gently to spooked horses, the way his face changed when he smiled. She told herself she was just grateful, just appreciating the first kindness she had known in too long. But her heart knew the difference between gratitude and the warm flutter that happened when his hand brushed her passing tools, or when she caught him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. 3 weeks after her arrival, riders came to the ranch wearing mining company badges and expressions that promised trouble. Naomi was in the kitchen when they arrived, and she froze at the sound of strange voices demanding to know if Yates had seen any runaway contract workers. She pressed herself against the wall beside the window where she could hear, but not be seen, her heart hammering so hard she thought they must be able to hear it. Yates met them in the yard, and his voice carried that same quiet steadiness she had come to recognize as his core nature. "I run a ranch, not a boarding house for runaways," he said. "I have not seen any mining company workers, just me and my housekeeper managing things here." "We heard you might have hired new help recently," one of the riders said, and Naomi recognized the voice as belonging to one of Greer's favorites, a mean-spirited man named Collins. "Samuel Greer is real interested in finding a woman who assaulted him and stole company property. There is a reward for information. The only people here are me and Mrs. Morrison, who has worked for me for 5 years, Yates said, and there was steel under the casual words now. "You are welcome to check the barn if you do not believe me, but I do not appreciate the implication that I would harbor criminals." There was a tense moment where Naomi thought they might push it, might demand to search the house, but then Collins made a disgusted sound, and she heard the creak of saddle leather as they mounted up. "If you see anyone suspicious, there is money in it for you," Collins called as they rode away. "Greer does not forget people who help him, or people who get in his way." Naomi waited until the hoofbeats faded before she came out of the kitchen on shaking legs. Yates was still standing in the yard, watching the direction the riders had gone, and he did not turn around when she approached. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You did not have to lie for me." "I did not lie," Yates said, turning to face her. "I do not have any mining company workers here. I have a ranch hand named Naomi who works for fair wages and can leave any time she wants. That is not the same thing at all." He studied her face, and something in his expression softened. "But I think we need to be more careful for a while. If Greer is offering rewards, other people will be looking too. Can you handle a gun?" Naomi shook her head. "I never learned." "Then that is the next skill you are going to pick up," Yates said. "Because out here, being able to defend yourself is not optional, it is survival." The shooting lesson started that afternoon and continued every evening after the regular work was done. Yates was patient but demanding, making her practice until her arms ached and her ears rang from the gunshots. He taught her to load, aim, and fire with the same methodical care he brought to everything else, never rushing, always explaining why things mattered. Naomi discovered she had a decent eye and a steady hand once she got over her initial fear of the weapon. She also discovered that spending hours alone with Yates, standing close while he adjusted her stance or guided her aim, made that warm flutter in her chest grow into something that could no longer be mistaken for simple gratitude. Spring arrived in a rush of wildflowers and warming temperatures, bringing with it the chaos of calving season. Naomi learned to assist with difficult births, to bottle feed orphaned calves, to recognize the signs of illness or injury in newborns. She worked alongside Yates through long nights when cows labored and needed watching, and in those quiet hours between crises, they talked. He told her about inheriting the ranch from his father, about the dream of building something lasting in country that did not make that easy. She told him about her childhood in Sierra Vista, about her father dying when she was 12, about watching her mother slowly drown in grief and whiskey until there was nothing left of the woman she had been. "I used to think she would get better," Naomi said one night while they sat watching a new mother nuzzle her calf in the lamplit barn. "I kept believing that if I just tried hard enough, loved her enough, she would choose me over the bottle. It took years to understand that it was never about me. I could not fix her because she did not want to be fixed." "That must have been a hard lesson," Yates said quietly. "The hardest," Naomi agreed, "but maybe also the most important. Because once I accepted that I could not save her, I could finally focus on saving myself." She looked at him in the warm lamplight, at the kind eyes and the strong hands and the patient steadiness that had become her anchor in the storm. "You saved me too, you know. When you offered me that hand in the desert, you gave me back my life." Yates met her gaze, and there was something vulnerable in his expression that she had never seen before. "I did not save you, Naomi. You saved yourself when you ran. I just gave you a safe place to land." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away and brushed a strand of hair back from her face. "But I am glad I was there. I am glad every day that I rode out that morning and found you." The kiss happened naturally, inevitable as sunrise, and Naomi felt something tight and scared in her chest finally relax into trust. His lips were warm and gentle, asking rather than demanding, and when she leaned into him, his arms came around her with careful strength. They stayed like that for a long moment, holding each other in the barn while the new calf nursed, and the night sounds of the ranch continued around them. When they finally pulled apart, Naomi was smiling for the first time in longer than she could remember. "I think I am falling in love with you," she said, because after everything she had survived, she was done with being afraid to name true things. "I think I fell in love with you the moment you threatened me with a rock in the desert," Yates said, his own smile warm and real. "I just did not want to rush you or make you feel like there were expectations attached to working here." "The only expectation I want is more of this," Naomi said, and kissed him again, longer this time, tasting the promise of a future she was building with her own hands. Summer came in with heat that made the high desert shimmer and turned afternoon work into an exercise in endurance. The ranch thrived under Naomi and Yates's combined efforts, the cattle healthy and the land productive. Mrs. Morrison watched them dance around each other with knowing eyes and a smile that suggested she had seen this coming long before either of them admitted it. Naomi's hands grew calloused and strong from work. Her skin bronzed from sun exposure despite the hats she wore. She learned to rope and ride, to doctor sick animals, to read the weather in the clouds that built over the distant mountains. She was becoming someone new, someone capable and confident, built from the broken pieces of who she had been. In July, Yates asked her to marry him while they were riding fence lines in the early morning coolness. There was no fancy speech, just him pulling his horse up beside hers and saying, "I know we have not known each other long by some standards, but I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore. Will you marry me, Naomi Kingston? Will you build this ranch and this life with me as my wife and partner?" Naomi felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears, the kind she had not known she could still shed. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion. "Yes, I will marry you, Yates Younger. I will build a life with you that no one can ever sell or take away." They were married in Sierra Vista in August, exactly 1 year after her mother had sold her contract. Naomi wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Morrison had helped her sew, and Yates wore his good suit that he claimed felt like wearing a straitjacket, but endured for the occasion. The ceremony was small, just Mrs. Morrison and a few ranching neighbors who had become friends, conducted by a circuit preacher who passed through once a month. But small did not mean any less important. When Yates slipped his grandmother's ring onto Naomi's finger and promised to love and honor her for all their days, Naomi felt like she was finally, truly free of everything that had come before. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food that everyone had contributed to. There was music from a fiddle player who lived on the neighboring spread, and dancing that went on until the stars came out thick and bright overhead. Naomi danced with her husband, feeling his strong arms around her and his heart beating steady against her cheek, and she thought about that girl in the dusty street with bound hands watching her mother walk away. That girl would not have believed this moment was possible. But that girl had also possessed a core of steel that refused to break, and Naomi honored her by embracing this joy without reservation or fear. Their first year of marriage brought challenges that tested them both. A drought in the fall made water scarce and feed expensive. A hard winter killed several head of cattle despite their best efforts. There were weeks where money was tight and worry kept them up at night discussing options and making hard choices. But they faced everything together, partners in truth as well as name, and somehow that made even the hardest times manageable. Naomi discovered that she had a head for business, and she started keeping proper books for the ranch, tracking expenses and income with the arithmetic she had taught herself. She also started a small egg and butter business, selling to the mercantile in Sierra Vista, and slowly building a nest egg that gave them a cushion against disasters. In the spring of 1875, Naomi realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complicated mix of joy and terror, because being a mother meant facing all the fears and failures she had learned from her own mother. She told Yates one evening after dinner, blurting it out before her courage failed, and his reaction erased every doubt. He picked her up and spun her around despite her laughing protests, his face bright with uncomplicated happiness. "We are going to be parents," he said, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a family." "Are you sure you are ready for this?" Naomi asked, needing to hear him say it. "Because I am terrified I will mess it up the way my mother messed up me." Yates set her down carefully and took both her hands in his. "You are nothing like your mother, Naomi. Nothing. You are strong and loving and one of the most capable people I have ever met. You are going to be an amazing mother because you know what not to do, and because you have so much love to give that it practically radiates from you. And I am going to be right beside you, learning how to be a father, and we are going to figure this out together like we have figured out everything else." The pregnancy progressed through the summer heat, with Naomi determinedly working as long as her body allowed despite Yates and Mrs. Morrison trying to wrap her in cotton wool. She felt better when she was useful, when she was contributing to building their life. The baby grew strong inside her, making its presence known with kicks and rolls that amazed her every single time. She caught herself talking to the little person she had not met yet, making promises about the kind of mother she would be, the kind of life she would provide. Their son was born in November during an early cold snap that made the air sharp and clear. The labor was long and difficult, assisted by Mrs. Morrison and the doctor from Sierra Vista who barely made it in time. But when Naomi finally held her baby, looked into his tiny scrunched face and counted his perfect fingers and toes, every moment of pain evaporated into overwhelming love. Yates cried when he held his son for the first time, tears streaming down his face without shame, and Naomi fell even more deeply in love with this man who was not afraid to show his emotions. They named him James, after Yates's father, and he became the center of their universe in the way babies do. Naomi navigated the exhausting early months of motherhood with determination and an ever-present worry that she would fail somehow. But she discovered that love was a powerful teacher, and instinct filled in where experience lacked. She nursed her son and sang to him and walked miles around the ranch house soothing his colicky cries. She watched him grow and change daily, learning to smile and coo and eventually laugh in a way that made her entire world feel bright. Yates was a devoted father who treated diaper changes and night feedings as part of his responsibility, rather than women's work alone. He built a cradle for James with his own hands, carving designs into the wood that showed hours of patient love. He walked the floor at night when the baby was fussy, letting Naomi rest when she was at the end of her rope. They figured out parenthood together, making mistakes and learning from them, building the kind of family neither of them had truly had growing up. James was 6 months old when Samuel Greer showed up at the ranch without warning, riding in with 2 hired guns and an expression that promised violence. Naomi was in the garden with the baby when she heard the horses, and her blood turned to ice when she recognized Greer's voice demanding to see Yates. She scooped up James and ran for the house, her heart pounding, calling for Mrs. Morrison to hide with the baby while she grabbed the rifle Yates had taught her to use. She reached the porch just as Greer was saying, "I know you have been harboring my property. That woman assaulted me and stole from the company. I am here to collect her and bring her back to face justice." "There is no one here by that description," Yates said, his hand resting casual but ready on his gun belt. "And you are trespassing on my land. I suggest you leave before this gets ugly." "Or what?" Greer sneered. "You will shoot me. There are 3 of us and 1 of you." "Those are not good odds, rancher." "Actually, there are 2 of us," Naomi said, stepping onto the porch with the rifle shouldered and aimed with the steady confidence Yates had trained into her. "And I am a much better shot than I was 2 years ago. So you need to reconsider your odds, Greer." Greer's face went purple with rage when he saw her. "You are coming back with me, girl. You owe the company for breach of contract, theft, and assault. You are looking at years in prison if you do not come peacefully." "I am not going anywhere with you," Naomi said, keeping the rifle steady. "That contract was fraudulent because my mother had no legal right to sell me into servitude. I am a free woman, married to this man, and living on this land legally. You have no claim to me or my life. Now get off our property before I put a bullet in you to match that broken nose I gave you." The standoff stretched taut as a wire, and Naomi could see Greer calculating his options, weighing his pride against the very real possibility of getting shot. The hired guns looked nervous, not quite willing to die for someone else's grudge. Finally, Greer spat in the dirt and wheeled his horse around with a violence that made it shy sideways. "This is not over," he snarled. "I have friends in territorial government. I will see you both ruined for this." "You are welcome to try," Yates said calmly. "But I suggest you spend your energy elsewhere. We are not afraid of you, Greer. We are not afraid of anyone anymore." They watched the three riders disappear down the road in a cloud of dust and anger. When they were finally out of sight, Naomi lowered the rifle with shaking hands, and Yates pulled her into his arms, holding her tight while the adrenaline drained away, leaving her weak and trembling. "It is over," he murmured against her hair. "He knows he cannot take you now. He was just trying to intimidate us, and it did not work." "What if he really does have connections?" Naomi asked, voicing the fear that gnawed at her. "What if he can make legal trouble for us?" "Then we will fight it," Yates said firmly. "We will get a lawyer if we need to. We will go to the territorial governor if we have to. But I promise you, Naomi, no one is taking you away from this life we built. No one." The threatened legal trouble never materialized. They later heard through the ranching community that Greer had been fired from the mining company after an investigation revealed he had been skimming profits for years. The mining operation itself shut down 6 months later when the silver veins played out, and the workers scattered to other camps or other lives. Naomi felt a complex mix of satisfaction and sadness when she heard the news. She was glad to be free of that shadow hanging over her, but she thought about the other women she had traveled north with, and she hoped they had found their own paths to freedom. Life on the ranch continued its rhythms through the passing seasons. James grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's steady temperament and his mother's determined spirit. Naomi and Yates expanded their operation gradually, buying more land when they could afford it, building their herd, improving the house and outbuildings. Mrs. Morrison retired when James was 3, moving to live with her daughter in Tucson, and Naomi took over full management of the household while also keeping the ranch books and helping with the outdoor work. In 1878, Naomi gave birth to twin daughters who came howling into the world with impressive lungs and already distinctive personalities. Sarah was calm and observant, while Rebecca was energetic and demanded attention. Yates handled the chaos of 3 small children with his characteristic patience, and Naomi marveled at how far she had come from that terrified girl running through the desert. She was a wife, a mother, a rancher, a partner in a thriving business. She had rebuilt her life not just brick by brick, but moment by moment, choice by choice, until she stood unbreakable. The twins were 2 years old when Naomi's mother died in Sierra Vista, killed by the liver failure that was the inevitable end to decades of drinking. Naomi received the news from the town doctor, who had treated her mother in the final days. He said that her mother had asked for her at the end, had seemed to want forgiveness, or maybe just to see the daughter she had sold away. Naomi felt complicated grief rise up at the news, a tangled mess of old pain and stubborn love and anger that would never fully resolve. "You want to go to town?" Yates asked gently when she told him. "Pay your respects or get closure or whatever you need." Naomi thought about it for a long moment, standing in the house she had made a home, surrounded by the family she had built and the life she had fought for. "No," she said finally. "She made her choices and I made mine. I grieved for her years ago when she chose whiskey over her daughter. I do not need to do it again." But she did go to Sierra Vista a week later, not to the small cemetery where her mother was buried, but to the courthouse where public records were kept. She filed paperwork officially changing her legal status from the fraudulent contract to free citizen. She registered her marriage legally, making sure there was documentation that protected her rights. She ensured that her children's births were properly recorded. She was creating a paper trail that proved her existence and her legitimacy in a world that often tried to deny women both. On the way home, she rode past the place where the auction had happened 5 years earlier. The building was different now, converted to a feed store, but she remembered exactly where she had stood with bound hands watching her life become property. She remembered the fear and humiliation and the desperate promise she had made to herself. Looking at that spot now, Naomi felt a fierce satisfaction that she had kept that promise in every way that mattered. The ranch thrived through the early 1880s as Naomi and Yates became respected members of the regional ranching community. They were known for fair dealing, quality livestock, and the kind of steady reliability that made them good neighbors. Naomi developed a reputation as someone who could be counted on in a crisis, whether that meant helping with a difficult calving at a neighboring ranch or taking in a family whose house had burned until they could rebuild. She remembered what it felt like to have nothing, to depend on the kindness of strangers, and she paid that kindness forward whenever she could. Their children grew healthy and strong, shaped by the combination of hard work and deep love that characterized the younger household. James showed an early aptitude for working with animals, spending hours with his father learning the skills that would let him run the ranch someday. Sarah was quieter but observant, always watching and learning, with a gift for numbers that made Naomi suspect she would take over the bookkeeping eventually. Rebecca was pure energy, into everything, asking endless questions and charming everyone she met with her irrepressible enthusiasm. In 1883, Naomi discovered she was pregnant again, and the news brought mixed feelings. She was 40 years old now, and pregnancies at her age carried more risk. But Yates was delighted, and the children were excited about a new baby, and Naomi decided to trust that her body knew what it was doing. The pregnancy was easier than her previous ones, possibly because she was not trying to do heavy ranch work this time. She let Yates and James handle more of the physical labor while she focused on the household and bookkeeping, and she allowed herself to simply enjoy the miracle of new life growing inside her. Their second son was born in February 1884 during a rare snowstorm that blanketed the high desert in white. The labor was quick and uncomplicated, and when Naomi held this unexpected gift, this child born to parents who were supposed to be too old for babies, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the life she had built. They named him Daniel, and he became the baby of the family, doted on by older siblings who thought he was the most fascinating thing that had ever happened. The years continued their steady march through the 1880s, bringing changes both large and small. The railroad finally extended a line closer to their region, making it easier to ship cattle and receive supplies. Sierra Vista grew from a frontier town into a proper community with schools and churches, and even a telegraph office. The Wild West of Naomi's youth was gradually being tamed into something more civilized, though the land itself remained as challenging and beautiful as ever. James grew into a young man who was his father's true heir, with the same steady competence and quiet strength. When he turned 21 in 1896, Yates officially made him a full partner in the ranch, recognizing that the operation's success was as much James's work as his own parents'. The twins developed into distinct individuals. Sarah became the ranch bookkeeper as Naomi had predicted, with a head for business that helped them navigate the complicated economics of cattle ranching. Rebecca married a neighboring rancher's son and moved 5 miles down the road, close enough to visit often but far enough to have her own life. Daniel grew up in a household where love was abundant and expectations were high. He was the baby for only a few years before he started insisting he could do everything his older siblings did. And Naomi learned to let him try and fail and try again, understanding that building confidence required allowing struggle. He had his mother's stubborn determination and his father's kind heart, and Naomi knew he would find his own path in time. In 1900, Naomi turned 47, and she and Yates celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together friends and family from across the region. Looking around at the gathering, at the life that filled their home and land, Naomi felt a deep sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with survival and choice. She had been sold like property, had run into the desert with nothing, had built this entire existence from determination and the helping hand of a good man who had seen her worth when she was at her lowest. That evening, after the guests had left and the children were asleep, Naomi and Yates sat on the porch watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. He held her hand with the same gentle strength he had shown her from the beginning, his thumb rubbing slow circles on her skin. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Helping me that day, taking the risk of hiding a runaway and standing up to Greer." Yates was quiet for a moment, considering the question with his characteristic thoughtfulness. "Not for one single second," he said finally. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Naomi. You and the life we built together. Everything I am, everything I have, it is all better because you are in it." "I would not have survived without you," Naomi said, letting herself lean against his shoulder. "When I was running through that desert, I was not sure I would make it through the next day, let alone build a life worth living. You gave me the chance to become who I was meant to be." "No," Yates said gently but firmly. "You gave yourself that chance when you refused to stay broken. I just provided a safe place for you to heal and grow. Everything else, all the strength and capability and love you show every day, that was always in you. Your mother tried to sell it away, but she could not, because you cannot actually sell someone's soul or spirit. You brought those with you into the desert and you rebuilt your life from them, brick by brick, until you became absolutely unbreakable." Naomi felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were good tears, healing tears, the kind that washed away old pain and left room for joy. "I love you," she said. "I have loved you since you offered me your hand in that creek bed, but I love you more with every year that passes. You are my partner and my best friend and the foundation that let me build everything else. And you are my heart," Yates said simply. "Always have been, always will be." They sat together in the comfortable silence of long partnership, watching the stars wheel overhead and listening to the night sounds of the ranch they had built together. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and closer by, the horses moved softly in the barn. The wind carried the scent of sage and dust, and the particular smell of home that Naomi had come to associate with safety and love. The new century brought changes that transformed the West in ways both exciting and concerning. Automobiles started appearing on the roads, though horses remained more practical in ranch country. Electricity and telephone lines slowly spread outward from the cities. The frontier that had defined the Wild West was declared officially closed, though anyone who actually lived in the territory could have told you that wild country does not become tame just because someone draws lines on a map. James married a teacher from Sierra Vista in 1902, and they built a house on the eastern section of the ranch property. His wife, Catherine, was smart and capable, and she fit into the younger family like she had always belonged there. A year later, James and Catherine gave Naomi and Yates their first grandchild, a little girl named Emma, who had her grandmother's determined chin and her grandfather's steady eyes. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Naomi felt the full weight of everything she had survived and built. This child existed because Naomi had refused to stay broken, because she had run into the desert and found a man willing to help, because she had chosen to build rather than surrender. Emma would grow up in a world where her grandmother was respected, where the family name meant something, where no one could sell her life away because her family was strong and established and unbreakable. Sarah married at 25 to a banker from Tucson, and though she moved to the city, she kept the ranch books from afar and visited often enough that her parents never felt like she was truly gone. Rebecca had her first baby the same year Sarah married, making 1903 a year of weddings and grandchildren, and the particular joy that comes from watching your legacy extend into the future. Daniel, at 19, announced that he wanted to study law, and while Yates was initially disappointed that his youngest would not be a rancher, Naomi supported the decision wholeheartedly. She understood the importance of education and professional skills, understood how they provided security that even land ownership could not always guarantee. They used some of their savings to send Daniel to study in Tucson, and he visited home during breaks, full of stories about legal precedents and courtroom procedures that made Naomi's head spin, but filled her with pride. The ranch continued to thrive under James's increasingly central management, with Yates gradually stepping back from the day-to-day operations while remaining the ultimate authority. Naomi also shifted her focus, spending more time with her grandchildren, teaching them skills and telling them stories, passing on the hard-won wisdom that had brought her from bound hands in a dusty street to matriarch of a ranching family. In 1905, Daniel came home from law school with his degree and a proposal that surprised everyone. He wanted to open a practice in Sierra Vista, focusing on helping people who could not afford expensive lawyers, people like the contract workers Naomi had been, people who needed an advocate against larger, more powerful entities. Naomi sat with her youngest son on the porch where she had spent so many evenings with Yates, and she listened to his passionate explanation of why this mattered. "I grew up hearing your story, Mama," Daniel said. "Hearing about how the system failed you, how the mining company treated workers like property, how you had to run and fight just to have basic human rights. And I kept thinking that there should be someone to help people in those situations, someone to stand between them and the powerful interests that want to exploit them. I want to be that someone." Naomi felt her heart swell with love and pride for this son who had taken her pain and transformed it into purpose. "Then that is exactly what you should do," she said. "Your father and I will help you get established. And Daniel, thank you for caring enough to fight for people who cannot fight for themselves." Daniel opened his practice in 1906, and within months, he had more clients than he could easily handle. Workers with wage disputes, families facing eviction, women trying to escape abusive situations, all found their way to the young lawyer who charged based on ability to pay and sometimes did not charge at all. Naomi watched her son become the advocate she had needed 23 years earlier, and she felt like another piece of her past had been healed and transformed into something beautiful. The years passed with the particular swiftness that comes with age and contentment. Naomi and Yates celebrated their 30th anniversary in 1905, their 35th in 1910, watching their family expand with more grandchildren, watching their children build successful lives, watching the legacy they had created continue to grow. The ranch remained the family center, the place everyone returned to for holidays and celebrations, the foundation on which everything else rested. In 1913, Naomi turned 60, and the occasion brought the entire extended family together for a celebration that filled the ranch house and spilled out into the yard. There were children everywhere, ranging from James and Catherine's teenage son down to Rebecca's newest baby. There were daughters-in-law and sons-in-law. There were neighbors who had become friends. There was a life so full and rich that Naomi could barely remember what loneliness felt like. After dinner, when the children were playing and the adults were relaxing in the evening coolness, Daniel stood up and called for everyone's attention. "I want to say something about my mother," he said, and Naomi felt herself blush at being put on the spot. Most of you know her story, or parts of it at least. You know that she survived things that would have broken most people. You know that she ran into the desert with nothing and built a life that became this family, this ranch, everything we are together. He paused, meeting her eyes across the crowded room. But what I want you to understand is that my mother did not just survive. She transformed. She took pain and fear and betrayal, and she alchemized them into strength and love and generosity. She taught me that your past does not define you unless you let it, that you can be sold and discarded and still build something beautiful, that being unbreakable does not mean never breaking but rather refusing to stay broken. Daniel raised his glass, and everyone else followed suit. To Naomi Younger, who rebuilt her life brick by brick, and in doing so built a legacy that will last for generations. We are all here because you refuse to give up. Thank you for that gift, Mama. Thank you for being unbreakable. Naomi felt tears streaming down her face as the room erupted in agreement and applause. Yates wrapped his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him, overwhelmed by love and gratitude and the sheer improbability of this life. She thought about that girl in the street, about the promise she had made, and she realized that she had not just kept that promise. She had exceeded it in ways she never could have imagined. The evening continued with music and laughter, with grandchildren climbing into her lap asking for stories, with her children reminiscing about growing up on the ranch, with friends sharing their own memories of how Naomi had helped them through hard times. As the stars came out and the desert air cooled, Naomi looked around at the gathering and felt complete in a way that transcended simple happiness. This was fulfillment. This was purpose. This was the life she had built, brick by brick, choice by choice, love by love, until she stood unbreakable at the center of everything that mattered. Later that night, lying in bed beside Yates, Naomi reflected on the long journey from that terrible day in 1873 to this perfect evening in 1913. 40 years separated those two moments, 4 decades of hard work and love and determination. She had been sold like property, but she had bought herself back with her own strength. She had been broken, but she had rebuilt herself into something stronger than she had been before. She had been alone, but she had created a family that would extend forward into time long after she was gone. "What are you thinking about?" Yates asked quietly, his voice carrying the comfortable intimacy of decades together. "I am thinking that I would not change anything," Naomi said. "Not even the hard parts, because the hard parts made me who I am, and who I am led me to you and to this life. If I could go back and prevent my mother from selling me, I would not do it, because then I would never have run into the desert and you would never have found me, and none of this would exist." Yates was quiet for a moment, then said, "I understand what you mean. But I am still sorry you had to suffer to get here. You deserved better from your mother. You deserved better from a world that allowed women to be treated like property." "Maybe," Naomi agreed, "but I also deserved you, and I deserved this life, and I got both. So in the end, I think the universe balanced out." They lay together in the darkness, holding hands like they had that first night after they were married, and Naomi felt the deep peace that comes from knowing you are exactly where you are supposed to be. She had rebuilt her life brick by brick, and the structure she had created was solid enough to shelter generations. She was unbreakable not because she had never been broken, but because she had learned how to put herself back together stronger than before. And that, she thought as sleep claimed her, was the greatest victory of all. The years continued their steady march, bringing the challenges and joys that come with aging. Yates developed arthritis in his hands that made certain ranch tasks difficult, but he adapted with his characteristic patience, finding new ways to contribute. Naomi's joints also ached more than they used to, and she moved a bit slower, but her mind remained sharp and her spirit undimmed. They became the wise elders of the family, the ones younger generations came to for advice and stories, and the particular comfort that comes from people who have survived everything and still found joy. In 1918, the Great War ended, and Daniel came home from serving as a military lawyer, older and quieter but fundamentally unchanged. His practice thrived in the post-war years, as returning soldiers needed help navigating benefits and legal issues. James and Catherine's children were growing into adults themselves, and the ranch passed to a third generation of youngers who had never known anything but security and love. Naomi was 65 years old and grandmother to 12 grandchildren with 2 more on the way when she finally told her full story to the oldest of her grandchildren, James and Catherine's son William, who was now 21 and preparing to take over ranch operations from his father. They sat on the porch, just the two of them, and Naomi laid out the full truth of where she had come from and what she had survived. William listened with wide eyes, occasionally asking questions, clearly struggling to reconcile the respected matriarch he had always known with the desperate runaway his grandmother had once been. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment before saying, "I had no idea, Grandma. I mean, I knew pieces, but not the whole story. You are the strongest person I have ever known." "Strength is not about never falling down," Naomi said. "It is about getting back up every time you fall. It is about choosing to build even when destroying would be easier. It is about loving even when you have been hurt. That is what I want you to remember, William. You come from a line of survivors and builders. Whatever challenges you face, you have that in your blood." William hugged her tight, and Naomi felt the continuation of everything she had fought for. This young man would carry the family forward. He would tell his own children and grandchildren about the woman who rebuilt her life brick by brick. The story would continue, transformed by each telling but always rooted in the truth that you can be sold, discarded, broken, and still become unbreakable if you refuse to give up. Yates died peacefully in his sleep in 1920, at the age of 72, with Naomi holding his hand and his children surrounding the bed. His death was not tragic or untimely, just the natural end to a life well lived, but it still broke something in Naomi's heart that she knew would never fully heal. He had been her partner for 45 years, her savior and her best friend, the foundation on which she had rebuilt everything. Losing him felt like losing part of herself. At his funeral, attended by what seemed like half the territory, people spoke about Yates's integrity, his fairness, his quiet strength. They talked about how he had built a successful ranch through hard work and smart management. They praised his character and his kindness. But what Naomi remembered, standing beside his grave, was simpler and more profound. He had seen her at her lowest moment and offered his hand without hesitation. He had protected her when she was vulnerable and partnered with her when she was strong. He had loved her without reservation for 45 years, and that love had been the brick and mortar that let her rebuild everything else. The grief was terrible, a physical ache that made breathing difficult and sleep impossible. But Naomi had survived worse, and she had taught herself long ago that you survive by moving forward one moment at a time. She leaned on her children and grandchildren, let them support her through the worst of it, and slowly, gradually, found a way to live with the loss. Yates was gone, but everything they had built together remained. The ranch, the family, the legacy of love and strength and determination. He lived on in all of it, in the faces of grandchildren who had his eyes, in the values that shaped how the family operated, in the memories that Naomi carried like treasures in her heart. She lived another 15 years after Yates's death, years that brought more great-grandchildren and changes that transformed the West beyond recognition. The automobile became standard. Electricity reached even rural areas. Radio brought the world into remote ranch houses. The Wild West of her youth became history, something people romanticized and mythologized, often getting the details entirely wrong. Naomi watched the transformation with interest and occasional amusement, understanding that every generation thought their time was unique, when really, human nature remained remarkably consistent across the decades. In 1935, at the age of 82, Naomi fell ill with pneumonia. She knew almost immediately that this was different from previous illnesses, that her body was finally ready to stop fighting. Her children gathered at the ranch, bringing her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, filling the house with family one last time. She lay in the bed she had shared with Yates, looking at faces that carried forward the legacy she had built, and she felt satisfied in a way that transcended the fear of dying. Daniel sat beside her bed one afternoon, holding her hand with the same gentle strength his father had shown. "Are you scared, Mama?" he asked quietly. "No," Naomi said, her voice weak but certain. "I am ready. I have lived a long, full life. I survived things that should have destroyed me, and I built something beautiful from the ruins. I loved and was loved. I raised good children who became good adults. I have grandchildren and great-grandchildren who will carry forward the values your father and I taught. What is there to be scared of?" "I am going to miss you," Daniel said, tears streaming down his face. "And I am going to miss all of you," Naomi agreed. "But you do not need me anymore. You are all strong and capable and full of love. You know who you are and where you come from. That is enough." She gathered her remaining strength and asked for all her children and grandchildren to come into the room. When they were assembled, crowding close, she looked at each face in turn, memorizing them, loving them. "I want you to remember something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was sold like property when I was your grandmother's age. I had nothing. I was nothing in the eyes of the law and society, but I refused to accept that as my ending. I ran into the desert, and I was lucky enough to find your grandfather, but the courage to run, the determination to rebuild, those came from inside me. They were always there, waiting for the moment I needed them." She paused to catch her breath, and every person in the room waited silently. "You all have that same strength inside you. Life will knock you down. It will break your heart and test your limits and make you wonder if you can continue. But you can. You will. Because you are youngers and we do not stay broken. We rebuild brick by brick until we stand unbreakable. Promise me you will remember that." The room chorused promises and tears, and Naomi smiled at them all, feeling the love that filled the space like physical warmth. She closed her eyes, exhausted from the effort of speaking, and let herself drift on a tide of memories. She saw Yates offering his hand in the desert. She saw her children being born. She saw the ranch growing and thriving. She saw 45 years of marriage, and 62 years of rebuilding herself into someone who mattered, someone whose life had meaning and impact. Naomi died that evening as the sun set over the Arizona desert, surrounded by family, secure in the knowledge that she had kept every promise she made to herself that terrible day in 1873. She had rebuilt her life brick by brick. She had created something that could not be sold or taken away. She had stood unbreakable through everything life threw at her, and in doing so, she had built a legacy that would endure for generations. At her funeral, attended by what seemed like the entire population of Sierra Vista and the surrounding ranching community, Daniel gave the eulogy. He told his mother's full story, holding nothing back, letting everyone understand exactly who Naomi Younger had been and what she had overcome. He talked about her being sold by her mother, about running into the desert, about meeting Yates and building the Younger ranch from nothing. He talked about her strength and her kindness, her determination and her generosity, the way she had transformed pain into purpose. "My mother taught me that your beginning does not determine your ending," Daniel said, his voice steady despite his grief. "She taught me that you can be broken and still become unbreakable, that you can be sold and still become invaluable, that you can start with nothing and build everything that matters." She was sold like property, but she became a matriarch. She had nothing, but she built a legacy. She was broken, but she stood unbreakable until her last breath. He paused, looking out at the crowd of people whose lives his mother had touched. "We are all here because Naomi Younger refused to give up. Because she rebuilt her life brick by brick, and in doing so created a family, a ranch, a community that will last long after we are all gone. That is her legacy. That is what it means to be unbreakable. Not that you never fall, but that you always, always get back up." They buried Naomi beside Yates on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, under the endless Arizona sky that had witnessed her transformation from desperate runaway to beloved matriarch. The headstone was simple but elegant, carved with her name and dates, and a single line that James had chosen. She rebuilt her life brick by brick and stood unbreakable. In the years that followed, the Younger ranch continued to thrive under William's management and eventually his children's. The family grew and spread, with Youngers becoming teachers and lawyers and ranchers and doctors, all carrying forward the values that Naomi and Yates had instilled. They told her story to each new generation, keeping alive the memory of the woman who had refused to let her worst moment define her entire life. The Wild West that Naomi had known disappeared entirely, replaced by highways and suburbs, and all the trappings of modern life. But on that ranch in the Arizona high desert, her spirit remained, embedded in the land she had worked, the house she had made a home, the family she had built from determination and love. Visitors to the ranch often commented on the feeling of strength and peace that seemed to permeate the place, as if the very air remembered the woman who had stood unbreakable through everything life threw at her and emerged victorious on the other side. And on summer evenings, when the heat finally broke and the desert cooled, when the stars came out thick and bright overhead, you could almost see them there on the porch. Naomi and Yates, holding hands and watching their legacy unfold, together even in death as they had been in life. Proof that love and determination and the refusal to stay broken could transform everything. She had been sold, but she had bought herself back. She had been broken, but she had rebuilt herself stronger. She had started with nothing and created everything that mattered. Naomi Younger had stood unbreakable, and her story would endure as long as there were people who needed to believe that you can survive the worst and still build something beautiful.